Hello, I'm Mishka, and this channel is the Helsinki Renaissance, where we will be talking about arts and culture in hopefully a somewhat enlightening manner. Now, there's a certain other YouTube channel where I used to be in a habit of liking watching the film reviews that certain YouTuber um, put out there, but it just seems like um he just entered the kind of phase in his life where, for whatever reason, Joe doesn't feel like doing any more film reviews. I guess he doesn't see any point in doing them, and I've also reached somewhat similar a situation in my life. So, because I saw Joe on his channel talk about the Alexei German movie, Hard to Be a God. And since, well, the last time that I went downtown to a film store, I also happened to buy this. So I might as well talk about that. But just since I'm in a similar position of being on my way out, and you know, uh, I guess I don't have too many better ideas. So I might as well also, as I'm on my way out, discuss that fairly obscure Alexei German movie, which I think I saw another. I mean, I saw a YouTube video called "This Movie is Like Mad Max Directed by Andrei Tarkovsky." Now, I didn't watch the video, but I assume it must be talking about Hard to Be a God, which, like, the most succinct description of this movie is that if Andrei Tarkovsky would have directed Mad Max, it would be this. Now, it's imminently debatable whether, you know, the style of Andrei Tarkovsky and the subject matter of Mad Max, whether it's like a match made in heaven or not. But, this certainly is like that. But I don't feel like just talking about the Alexei German movie because, well, I think that there would be a lot to talk about in this. It's just that I didn't find this that inspiring, so I don't know if I do a full video on just this, but when I began doing arts and culture related videos, perhaps a year or two ago, I can't remember when it was, but in one of the very first videos, I was talking about our culture of categorizing films as either highbrow or lowbrow, and how I think that there doesn't seem to be a lot of rhyme and reason sometimes as to why some films are called highbrow and lowbrow, and I tried to talk about my own feelings as to what would be a better differentiation process between the mainstream and the avant-garde, because I think that everyone understands, like, no one can fail to understand the difference between the mainstream and the avant-garde. It's just that, like, some mainstream films are deemed highbrow and some mainstream films are deemed lowbrow, even though they are equal in being at being at odds with the avant-garde. So I think that there's just this is some fairly vainglorious nonsense in how some people are seemingly they're like trying to find ways to congratulate themselves over their own aesthetic preferences, and that's why well, like the only reason why anyone would want to be creating any hierarchies of genres, which happens to a certain extent in films, like in like 18th century painting or something. The hierarchy of genres would have been a lot more heavily maintained a culture compared to the sort of loosely agreed upon hierarchy of genres that exist in today's film culture, but it's still sort of there, and I just think that it's just it shouldn't be there at all, and that's what's distorting the language or the culture of film appreciation. So anyway, if I just reiterate the point in that video that was which I deleted because I thought that I could do so much better than that at basically every randomly chosen moment, so I didn't see a point of hanging on to it. But yet I'm hanging on to one point in that old video where when I the two films that I chose to represent the mainstream mentality and the avant-garde mentality were Titanic by James Cameron and Last Year at Marienbad by Alain Resnais. And what I said was that the reason why Titanic by James Cameron is a mainstream movie is because that movie, in every step of the way, that movie was designed to know how to meet anyone and everyone halfway. That when completely randomly chosen audience members, whether they were from Shanghai or Cairo or Mexico City or Seattle or Oslo or Napoli, like regardless of where you are on the planet, whether you're a banker or a pizza delivery man or a student or I don't know, some sort of a retired baker, like regardless of what your background is, Titanic is constructed in such a way that like whatever you have been in your life up until that point, Titanic will know how to meet you halfway. So when you, whoever you are, just wander into cinema and Titanic starts playing, like all that Titanic asks is that you bring your appetite, as it were, so that if you just have a willingness to enjoy the movie, why Titanic is a mainstream movie is that it's designed to be able to meet completely different kinds of people all over the world. People who are the opposite of each other in many ways. Titanic is supposed to know how to meet them halfway. And that's every mainstream movie. Like Eddie Murphy's Coming to America. The reason why it's a mainstream movie because it's a movie that's designed to be able to meet different kinds of people halfway. The reason why something like Lord of the Rings or I don't know, Woody Allen's Hannah and Her Sisters, if those are mainstream movies, it's because when those films are being constructed, they are constructed with a mind of knowing how to meet completely different kinds of people halfway. But then, when there's a film like Last Year at Marienbad by Alain Resnais, that's a film that's not interested in meeting anyone halfway. So, when Alain Robbe-Grillet, for instance, when he began writing Last Year at Marienbad, he designed the movie to sort of be anti-meaning, so that there isn't any great mystery. Like Last Year at Marienbad, it has no authorial intent whatsoever. Alain Robbe-Grillet says that there is no mystery, the movie isn't about anything, there's just one moment after another, it means whatever you want it to mean. Like Robbe-Grillet, he doesn't have any obvious functionalism to the moments. So, like in mentality, Titanic and Last Year at Marienbad, they couldn't be further from each other. I mean, you can get further from Titanic with some like really obscure avant-garde short films or whatever. But like, you don't have to go to the furthest distance just to see that mainstream filmmaking has one mentality and avant-garde filmmaking has another mentality. And I'd say that the attitude to the audience is what creates like a meaningful separation with mainstream and avant-garde, in that the mainstream cares about the audience to a fault. Like the mainstream filmmaking, it's just it doesn't dare to do much, because all it cares about is that the biggest amount of the overall audience would want to follow what the types of moves that they have been following with other mainstream movies in the past. So, like, the attitude towards audience with mainstream films is one, and then the attitude towards the attitude of avant-garde films to the audience is then the complete opposite. Like Alain Robbe-Grillet, he's just gonna say that he doesn't care about the audience. He probably never has cared about the audience, and like sometimes he cares about himself, and sometimes he doesn't even care what he thinks about the movies. He's just making them because he's in a position to sometimes be a screenwriter, sometimes be a director. Like, to him, there's just I suppose like Alain Robbe-Grillet might see the situation that creativity doesn't have to have an end in mind. Like with mainstream cinema, like James Cameron has an end in mind. He's trying to make I suppose the most technically impressive movie that he can make that reaches the biggest amount of audiences that he can make. Like James Cameron's creativity is harnessed to achieve an end, but Alain Robbe-Grillet's creativity, it's not necessarily harnessed to reach an end that he necessarily has in mind. Like maybe he has a subconscious end in mind or something, I don't know. But like the attitude to audience, it makes sense to keep dividing films between the mainstream and the avant-garde, because clearly they like if you are to talk about movies and describe them, then like there are at least these two main camps to which much of filmmaking falls. but then like some people, when they start talking about highbrow and lowbrow, and then like Sam Mendes movies are highbrow and Eddie Murphy movies are lowbrow and something, like, to me that somehow just distorts the scene, because like if Eddie Murphy movies are mainstream and Alan Rock Grier movies are avant-garde, well, what are Sam Mendes movies? Like the mainstream movies that sort of act like, because they are sort of different, like, to me it seems like they want to have their cake out and eat it too. That that they want the benefits of being a mainstream movie, but not to pay the price of being an avant-garde movie. But they're like congratulating themselves of their difference to some Eddie Murphy movies, but in reality they aren't really that different. So like, to me that's where like my break with lots of film criticism and lots of audience members, because to me it seems like there are sort of like phony divisions that don't really, like, the mainstream is chopped up to these subgenres that to me don't seem to make much sense. So like once upon a time I made a video where I was complaining about the kind of intellectually dishonest positioning of some of my fellow film fans or fellow film critics or whoever would be involved in discussions about highbrow and lowbrow and all of that. But anyway, it just occurred to me that since I have this Alexei German movie, How to Be a God, I could talk about two different movies that could conceivably be somewhat approachable examples of avant-garde filmmaking, about somewhat comparable subject matters, like two movies that basically have the same plot, but are like two films that basically have the same plot and are both avant-garde movies, but they still manage to basically be each other's opposites. So, I obviously have this Blu-ray of Alexei German's How to Be a God here, and I also had a Blu-ray of Walerian Borowczyk's Goto, The Isle of Love, L'Île d'Amour in French, and well, I sold my copy of Goto, The Isle of Love, but I had it before this, and there are certain striking similarities with the sort of plot level of these two movies. So anyway, this Blu-ray, like, I'd almost say that this Arrow Academy Blu-ray is more essential than the movie itself, because How to Be a God by Alexei German, it has a plot, but you could never be expected to easily understand the plot just watching the movie. Because like on these special features, which are like the special features on this particular Blu-ray, like they're these are among the best that I've gotten out of any special features of any Blu-ray or DVD. They are talking about the creative process and the filmmaking style and the plot of the movie and an overview of German's movies and personal history of German and just very informative stuff. This is I wasn't that sold on the movie, but I really liked this pickup that I did some months ago. But anyway, the plot of How to Be a God, which is totally like the plot beats are almost blink and you'll miss it moments. I remember when, like, I think I was blinking and then I realized that whoa, the plot just started happening, and it was like it was an almost surreal thing when the movie stopped being just you know, aimlessly bleak and chaotic, and actually had the plot happen. Anyway, in Alexei German's How to Be a God, there's an alternative version of Earth. So, like, there's another Earth somewhere else, and that other Earth is like in its Middle Ages, but well, something happened in the Middle Ages of that other Earth, where in our Earth, the Middle Ages were able to transition into the Renaissance and then gradually to the modern world. But the transitioning from the Middle Ages to the Renaissance in that other Earth didn't happen. So this Earth sent a group of scientists, like a group of scientists were like somehow transported to that other Earth. And one of those scientists made himself like the king, like made himself some sort of a supernaturally gifted king of some part of that other Earth. So that the movie begins with the kind of in medias res structure that there's no exposition whatsoever. We just begin by this this person who we later find out who has just somehow teleported himself to like some sort of a completely dilapidated castle in some sort of a completely chaotic archaic period where he's playing a saxophone and he's just in this really world-weary fashion lording over some hyena-like gangs of thugs who only enjoy the occasional wanton killings and muggings in broad daylight. So there's the briefest moment in the movie where the scientist who has made himself the king of this alternative Middle Ages, he's talking to his other scientists who are like trying to do like black ops type missions where they are trying to steer the culture into giving themselves a chance to transition to the Renaissance out of the Middle Ages. So like they are the scientists, they know what the hordes around them don't know, so that they are making the right moves in secret. And basically they are trying to save the world without having to tell anyone what they're doing, why they're doing it. They're just sort of, they're just there doing it. But anyway, mostly the movies, it's like the scientist, it's like, well, he's not really doing anything. Like it seems like his colleagues are the one who are doing things, and the scientist who made himself the king almost like some sort of a god of that god-forsaken part of alternative Middle Ages. He's not really doing anything. He's just wandering around. He's almost like sleepwalking, like the lead character in this movie. He is like some sort of a somnambulist. I mean, he's not really doing anything. He's just tired in the middle of the chaos. And this movie has a running time of basically 3 hours, and it's 3 hours of the main guy doing nothing. And if you thought that the plot that I just described, if you think that it sounds interesting, I assure you, this has no plot. Like, if somebody pressed shuffle on the DVD or the Blu-ray, and it played the scenes out of order, like people mightn't even be able to tell when one scene ends and another begins. Like, every moment is just so damn similar that it's like it only has a couple of different locations. Like the interior scenes in the dilapidated castle, they are incredibly similar. The outdoor scenes in the, monochrome mud, they are incredibly similar. It's as if like there are just the most minimal variations of basically 3 different setups, and then like those are just repeated and repeated and repeated and repeated and repeated and repeated, and like there's no plot, there's nothing to latch onto with this movie. Like Alexei German, he died before this apparently something like a passion project of his was finalized. So like we don't know how much of his vision this one reflects. Like well, I mean, this does seem to have like what Terrence Malick's shooting methods have become, in that Terrence Malick, he shoots 20 hours of footage and then he goes to editing room and he tries to discover a 2.5-hour movie out of it. So this seems like they just shot a bunch of stuff and hope to find a movie in the editing, and it's debatable. Did they, didn't they? It's kind of debatable, but like what isn't debatable is that there isn't really any plot. Like this is a 3-hour movie, everything about it promises to be an epic, but it has the content of a 3-page short story. So like it has story beats for 3 pages, but those are just stretched to their absolute breaking point. And this film probably will break some audiences. I made it through because it had something mesmerizing about it, but it surely does not have a story. But anyway, like I described as much as there is to be described. And anyway, as to Goto, The Isle of Love by I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name right, but Walerian Borowczyk. Goto, The Isle of Love. It also has a somewhat comparable plot, so that Goto is I don't know whether it's set in the past or the future, but it almost doesn't matter, because just like the other Earth in this movie, the island of Goto, it's like an alternative version. If how should I describe Goto, The Isle of Love? If you bring in elements of Bertolt Brecht, George Orwell, and Monty Python, and you throw those 3 things to the blender, and definitely don't forget Kafka. So like Kafka Kafka, George Orwell, Bertolt Brecht, and Monty Python. You put those four things into a blender, I think you'll have something like Goto, The Isle of Love. So anyway, the island of Goto is there's a totalitarian system in there, and just like there's something completely hopeless in the life in the alternative Middle Ages in this movie. There's something completely hopeless in Goto, The Isle of Love, but I mean it's still a comedy, I think. So like there's a certain lightness in the hopelessness that isn't here in the Alexei German movie, which is like the absurdist comedy in Goto, The Isle of Love. It makes it a very different experience than this, even though the main plot is sort of similar. So I think well, there's some sort of a totalitarian system in The Isle of Love. Like the movie doesn't really have much of a point. I suppose like there's a king. I mean, like I feel like whatever I say about the plot of Goto, The Isle of Love, I don't think that you can describe it because like well, I mean, like when I think about possible description, I don't want to make it sound like Peter Greenaway's the cook, the thief, his wife, and her lover, but like there is some sort of a setup with like a crazy tyrant of Goto, a thief, like a petty thief, the king's wife, and the thief somehow failing upwards in the world of maybe becoming the next crazy king of Goto. But anyway, like just like Hard to Be a God is not a movie about plot. Goto, The Isle of Love is also not a movie about the plot on any level. I would say that if Goto is about anything, it's about the process of the absurdity in a totalitarian system. So, like, just how the process comes to feel a meaningless life, and how everything just twists itself to something fairly sickening in that kind of a system. I think something like that is probably the point of Goto, The Isle of Love. But anyway, I think that Goto and Hard to Be a God, they have something similar to me, both on the plot level, in that there's basically characters in a hopeless situation, and no one's even really trying to fight because the movies aren't about fighting. The movies are just the movies are like psychological examinations that don't provide any kind of answers, that aren't designed to provide any kind of answers. It's just that the directors are inviting the viewer to look at these completely alien-seeming situations. So anyway, like to me, I seem to see some similarities in Goto, The Isle of Love, and Alexei German's Hard to Be a God. And I say that what makes them similar is that if there's a Hollywood movie about, say, an unjust system, then a Hollywood movie or a mainstream movie, it needs to do one of two things. so either it must have an emotional journey, so that people who are caught in a repressive system, they must be able to escape or alternatively to overthrow the system. So either there's the emotional journey that seems to create the point of the movie, or alternatively, the point of the movie is that they are taking a stance against the system, so that it's as if like there's like a certain easily grasped intellectual goal for how Hollywood movies fight the power when they do. So anyway, like it seemed like How to Be a God and Goto, the All of Love. They seem to represent the avant-garde mentality quite well, in that as I said, I feel like the two films are each other's opposites. So just as far as filmmaking goes, there's the kind of no wasted movement filmmaking style in Goto, the All of Love, that directors like Robert Bresson, Yasuchiro Ozu, Aki Kaurismäki, Jacques Tati, the way that those people, those directors, the way that every movement has been predetermined. Like a Robert Bresson movie is the opposite of improvisation. Like there are only pre-planned movements. You know, every raising of the hand was choreographed in advance. Like every tilt of the camera was pre-planned. Like Goto, the All of Love, it has that kind of minimalism that seeks to create like a new dynamism of movement, because there's such an intentionally created scarcity of movement that every new move seeks to be somehow significant. Whereas this Alexei German movie, it's like this is the opposite of Robert Bresson, in that this has wild long takes, like people running around in shot, 5 people talking at the same time, no one listening to anyone. It's like the camera spinning around. We don't even know whether it was like how much of an accident is as to what ends up taking the center stage, and the world in How to Be a God is completely chaotic, and the filmmaking is borderline chaotic. Now in the extras they do talk about how they choreographed long takes and so on, but there's no way that everything is done with precision. Like there is an element of chaos just being let loose in the subject matter and the filmmaking. And so just aesthetically the semantic habits of How to Be a God should be like those that are the opposite of Goto, the All of Love. But it's just interesting seeing how even two films that are made with the opposite kinds of moves, they are still somehow really resembling each other in the avant-garde, just by the very simple decision of not caring about meeting the audience halfway, which begins when the screenwriters or directors just decide that the movie that they do, it's not gonna have a point. Like uh, they'll just um, follow their inspiration since they happen to have it, but there's no particular end in sight, and that kind of open-ended uh, relation to meaning in avant-garde, it uh, it rubs some people the wrong way, and they can't accept it that a movie wouldn't have any kind of obvious meaning, uh, and that's why films like this well they aren't really watched that much, and uh, people insist on treating this as somehow just fundamentally faulty because uh, they were begun with a certain indifference to the ending point. And it definitely is the main divider with audiences that some people love the I don't know, the enigmatic nature in films like this, and as I said, others think that there's something faulty about how they were created. But anyway, I think that I have perhaps I've started to tire of both the mainstream and the more avant-garde type filmmaking, in that I don't know if I can get too much out of them personally, but well, mm, at least that the kind of sui generis aspect in movies like this, like at least that I can I can recognize the artistic mentality in somebody just wanting to really be unique. Uh, now, um, it didn't turn out that successful for me with this viewing. I don't know how I felt about Goto, The Isle of Love. I suppose I liked it slightly more than German's Avantgarde, but um, those are definitely very peculiar viewing experiences. But anyway, regardless of whether I like the movie or not, I can at least appreciate the artistry in daring to be unique rather than just following a formula set by successful predecessors. So, I don't know what I should end on, since I've somehow drifted away from all film watching myself, just like Joe on his channel. Like one of the last movies that he could get passionate about was this one. So whether mainstream or avant-garde, it's clear that mere schematism isn't enough to keep me interested. So that kind of hierarchy of genres, it can't play with me for, if no other reason than because well, as Werner Herzog said in a certain Wim Wenders documentary, we are surrounded by worn-out images and we deserve new ones. Like, you know, I appreciate that films like this are trying very hard not to be worn-out images, but I still think that there's something slightly worn out about them. And I like Werner Herzog, I also think that we definitely do deserve new ones, but that's just very hard to come by, and just any trying to solve that problem with the hierarchy of genres, that if we'll just focus on insert genre, then we'll escape the tyranny of worn out images and hack frauds in filmmaking. It's unfortunately not that easy. It's just, I don't think that there are that many non-worn out images available, which is why I'm on my way out. But like, I'd prefer to think of this as taking it's like taking a vacation from film watching rather than going away in disappointment. It's just I don't know whether I'll do, like, maybe I'll do one or two film related videos for this channel, but it's not a case that if I'll stop, it's because I can't be bothered to do any more videos. It's more like just showing interest to cinema is becoming more difficult because well, it just seems like the worn out images are wearing me out. So there won't be that many more, but well, I mean, I'd like to be able to contribute somehow in making a culture of somehow more vital contributions, but I don't know when the next time that I can do anything in there that's cinema related, but I'm gonna have to take this opportunity now to just take an exit, and then I don't know how long my vacation from film related stuff is, but I'm gonna go to it now. So anyway, those were some of my thoughts about this film and some other films like this and their position in the filmmaking culture. But anyway, those were my thoughts. Thank you for watching, and that was all for me for now. So bye bye.